The Cray team is so thrilled to be hosting this event for our friends. As many of you already know, Laura was formerly Deputy Director of Cray, so it has been very lovely to have her back at UCL. Here at Cray, we're a team of autistic and non-autistic staff and students based within the UCL Institute of Education and housed within the Department of Psychology and Human Development. We aim to conduct research that addresses the priorities of autistic people, their families, and other stakeholders through a participatory approach, which means we work with autistic people in all stages of our research and initiatives. We hope that this means that the work we do is meaningful to the autistic community. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to all the funders, supporters, and team members who make our work possible, and in particular, a special thank you to the Parents Foundation. But enough about Cray, because we're here for them. And on to today's event. Improving mental health therapies for autistic children and young people features contributions from autistic and non-autistic experts. This evening, we will hear from two of the book's editors, Laura Cray and Georgia Pavlopoulou. We will also hear from a panel of experts who will talk about why this book is important and how they hope professionals and families can use this book to improve autistic experiences. Thank you very much to all of you for being here to celebrate the launch of this incredibly important resource. Now it is my honor to introduce Claire Evans, Director of Education and Training and Clinical Director of the Anna Freud Center.
It's a real pleasure to be here today to celebrate the creation and the development of this book. And I don't know, Chloe Campbell is here tonight. Chloe has been integral to helping to develop this series of Anna Freud books, so huge thank you to her. I was thinking about when I read this book, I was really struck as a clinician how much I didn't know and how much this would have helped me in my own practice. And I think it sets out very practical ways of expanding our curiosity and working collaboratively with autistic children, young people and their families. It's neurodiversity affirming and moves away from a deficit-based model of autism as a disorder to thinking of autism as a difference and the positives of that difference. And I think the whole ethos of Georgia and the other editors and the whole book and everybody who's contributed is a humane approach, which I think is much, much needed and not always thought about. It asks us as individuals and the services that we work in and who work with autistic children and young people to see them as individuals, not just the name autism, and to recognize that autistic people are relational. They can make relationships, and it shows how building safety, respect, and continuity in a relationship can be big rewards for us as practitioners and children and young people that we work with. One of the things that comes across really clearly in this book, and it's something that we're fully committed to at Anna Freud, is co-production and co-delivery. I think the power of involving lived experience in this book is evidenced by the inclusion of a wide range of voices and perspectives in this book. And many of the chapters are written either wholly or in partnership with people with lived experience, which I think without it, this book just would not be able to say as much as it does. I think this book calls on us all as clinicians and educators and challenges ourselves, our thinking and our practice. You know, we should be asking ourselves as practitioners, what can we do differently? What can we learn from this, from the young people that we work with? And how can we adapt ourselves, our practice and our services? And how might, in doing this, can we really make a difference for the autistic young people in front of us? I think we can all learn something from this book and put the very tangible, practical ideas into practice, because in doing so, it might actually be more helpful to the children, young people, and families that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mel. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Frayne, and I was very, very pleased to be invited to be part of this book. I work now at the University of Birmingham in their Autism Education Research Centre, but before that I spent 8 very, very wonderful years here at the Centre for Research in Autism Education. And I just wanted to start off by saying a huge thank you to the CRAE team for hosting this event tonight. You've got the most amazing group of people. I had some of the best years of my career here, and it's been wonderful to get to be part of an event with you again. And it was actually when I was in my office at CRAE, gosh, I can't even think how long ago it was now, but Georgia asked to come and meet with me. And she came to my office, up all of the stairs in our office, and sat with me and said, I've got this idea, and I want you to be involved. And I was like, it sounds interesting. What is it? And Georgia was telling me about this amazing training that she had been running, training up the workforce on essentially empathetic and collaborative kind of support for autistic people in healthcare. And she was telling me about the work she was doing, particularly about the collaboration and co-creation goal. And she was saying that this work would come to an end at some point, and she really wanted a legacy from it, and something that people who've been to the course could continue to engage with, but also other people in the future could learn from. And she said, I want to edit a book. And I was like, gosh, okay. And what she said was she had some ideas about who would be involved. So obviously this was Georgia's vision, but Georgia also invited the brilliant Hurn, who's a very, very experienced and wonderful clinician, Damian Milton, who's an absolute legend in the field in terms of thinking about neurodiversity and different perspectives. And essentially she wanted to bring us all together and think about what this could look like together with all of those people that have contributed to the groups. And I think I remember kind of sitting down at the time, getting my teeth to the tube out and working out timelines and strategizing. I think that was my main contribution, just kind of getting everything. Making sure we have a book at the end. Making sure we have a book. This is our deadline, this is what we're working to, this is what I need by this date. But it really, I just want to emphasise just really kind of, I think, George's vision in relation to this. And if it wasn't for that vision about wanting to make a difference, it really, really wouldn't have been possible. And today it's on to kind of share some reflections on the book itself. And I think as I was doing so, I was really reflecting on how when I started out in the field, kind of over 20 years ago now, this book just wouldn't have existed. So if there was going to be a book about autism, it would be a book about probably cognition in autistic people and how it was deficient or defective as compared to the neurotypical norm. There would be no emphasis on mental health. When I started doing research in this field, if you were autistic, you could not get a secondary diagnosis. The only people I met during my initial research who were autistic with mental health problems had got their mental health diagnosis first. And it was a huge challenge to then go on and get that autism diagnosis. And I think the other thing that has really changed is that this is a very, very collaborative book that really all-rounds autistic perspectives. And again, 20 years ago, this just wouldn't have happened. So I think in that sense, it really, really is, I think, a very groundbreaking book and a book to be very, very proud of. And I think all of the contributors to the book should be enormously proud as well. Some of you may not know that this is actually our second launch of the book, and we had a really wonderful launch a couple of months ago at the Unemployed Centre. And what was really lovely there, I think it was the first, we've been working on this for years, we've been kind of reviewing chapters of the book and giving feedback, working with individual members or individual people that contributed to this book. But it was the first time we brought everyone together. It was actually the first time that all 4 editors had been in a room together. So we did this book during the pandemic, largely on Zoom calls. So actually after our initial meeting in my office, I don't think we met in person again about the book. And it was really lovely up and to celebrate it, and just to see how much it meant to people. And the book is dedicated to a young man who left this world too soon. I think his parents are here today. And actually, I was incredibly emotional at that book launch, hearing from you both, and hearing how much this means to you and how important this book is. And I think that's one of the reasons I think we can all be really, really proud of it. I think it really is hopefully going to make a difference. And I wanted to say a special congratulations to Georgia as well, who really, I mean, anyone who knows Georgia knows that Georgia wants to make a difference and works tirelessly to make a difference to the autistic people. She genuinely cares. She has a huge degree of empathy and compassion. I think that was what our guardian was with this book. And I think everyone in the pages of that can really see it. So I'm very, very proud that I've been as a colleague. I've been enormously grateful to have had the opportunity to work on this book. And it's a great pleasure that I can now introduce Georgia to give her lecture tonight. Sharing, I'm sorry, I didn't need to make you cry before you spoke. But sharing, you know, more of her really, really brilliant work.
Thank you so much.
I'll take the compliments. It's really, this book is teamwork. You can see every chapter has different goals, and this book is really capturing the efforts that we put. When running the IAF, now called of course now called psychometrical therapies, so the pathway we found in the for the autism and learning disabilities pathway and training workforce professionals. And it was really passion and vision and chaos in bringing the right people together, the people who were telling us that something is not working, that something needs to change. And the only way to bring that kind of change, at least in our curriculum, it was to listen to people, to agree, to disagree, to come together, and really consider in very curious way agency and collaboration. And what does that even mean for all of us? Therefore, these kind of three words have been key as well throughout the book in terms of how we can listen and work together. Evidentially, in every measure, life outcomes for autistic people are on average significantly poorer than those for non-autistic in terms of quality of life, in terms of mental health. Many of us are here or working in this field exactly in those who barriers to change. Just to remind some stuff in terms of mental health conditions, the extent time higher and more commonly in autistic children or general population. And that's not because of genes or something related to autism, but very much related to stigma, lack of sense of belonging, accuracy, and so on. Before the age of 12, autistic children are 28 times higher risk to die than suicide or to have suicidal ideas. Autistic people say that they're not taken seriously, say that they cannot access services, say that people don't believe them when they say how they feel, or when they say they don't know how they feel. In many cases, people are denied therapy because, after all, it's normal to have anxiety if you're autistic, right? Some people say that it's a normal part of you being anxious and depressed because you're autistic. Even when they have success, even when they are talking about things that they like, people dismiss them, or people don't necessarily believe them. Autistic hobbies and passions and focused interests are often to apologize. There are obsessions or repetitive, whatever you want to call it. Some people are having many hours but can start their way in therapy to change their passions or have access to something they really like, to show good hands or clap your hands, all this kind of stuff. I'll tell you a bit about how bear with me, I'll tell you how it all started in my head and filled with hands, that's entirely in there. I did my PhD here at Value. Towards the end of my PhD, I got this job as an affluent center, working with other colleagues there to understand how would you achieve this work for it. It was already a vision after curriculum, and then finally getting familiar with the curriculum, and I had just finished a few PhD studies. And this is when I had started noticing how do we see young people in our work? In terms of research, how are these young people, these teenagers are viewed as objects? We research about them, we talk about them. As how often do we see them as experts of their own life?
Do we research with them? Do we talk with them? Do we work with them or on and for them?
The other thing, it was the tyranny of the quantitative. I mean, I had finished my PhD, or when I was about to finish my PhD, I was very nice and told that as a qualitative researcher, well, we're not going to have building research, so what am I going to do next? There was that kind of tyranny of numbers that I was so much fascinated from the complexity of the stories of the people, and how numbers were so often simplifying as stories and what they have to say about their mental health. And that made me think of if you like, and I do a bunch of position. How do we speak more the local people, the very people who, of any age, of any ethnicity, with or without mental health struggle, when they're neurodivergent, of any ability, and their human rights to be involved in decisions that affect their lives. Already back then, the curriculum was kind of seating my spirit in that sense, because we were talking how the system of researchers doing their research, telling us what works, almost imposing it down to the clinician, and the clinician to the client, something works, something has to change. And then I also started getting involved more and more into that work. I noticed that those were the founded autistic people. Sometimes I had no clue about psychological therapies or even aspects of mental health, the anxiety, depression, trauma. And then those who really understood autism, who really understood about different modalities of psychological therapy, I couldn't understand autism, and you understand being less autistic people and how heterogeneous they are, how different we experience even amongst them, anxiety, depression, trauma, and so on. And then you look around and you work with 4 groups and you realize that the concepts used by governments in the very mainstream world, even in research, across different charities, they can be so different and paradoxical compared to the realities and the perceptions of the very people who have experience and the party methods, the parents, their siblings. And then there's all this idea, and that had haunted my previous 10 years before I started doing a PhD in terms of my clinical work and the job I was doing in Greece. You know, families have to intervene. Oh my God, have an autism diagnosis, you need parenting training. What does that imply for the parents? Big story, big conversation. What do we even intervene with? What are we trying to change? What evidence do we have about what it changes, how it changes? So these were kind of really interesting observations and created so many questions. And in all of that, where is the law? Where's the relationship? I was doing research into family relationships, particularly autistic and autistic siblings. And everything was so pathologized in every paper and every piece of work I was seeing. There was nothing about love, which at the end of the day, for many families, is at the core. But for many of us, researchers or practitioners, we do this job because we know it. And in so many ways, we know that there are many qualities of love, like active listening, like planning together, like trying to understand each other, but at the heart of what works. When we hear from parents, family members, what works, what is it that worked with that clinician, is that they made space for me. They believe, you know, this kindness, that's how it is. And when we think about so many autistic people, in fact, neurodivergent people, you can think here all sorts of intersections with or without learning disability, ADHDs, and so on. What is it? What is it about being in so much distress? One of the things we have discussed a lot with Alexis is how do we become and who we are in this world where we're divergent. It starts a lot from the relationship we have in the world. It starts a lot from the narratives. How do we hear always talking about that, right? What narratives shape neurodivergent people's deepest narratives about who they are, about themselves in the society? So I grew up in Greece. I have my bachelor in Greece, and I postgraduate course there as well. First time I was in an autism conference, sitting quietly, thinking, learning. That was the side, like, that's autism still in Greece in 2001. So this is, in case you haven't been in Crete or don't know very well that history, this is the labyrinth, and Theseus, the master, is in the middle, and then Ariadne, for Ariadne, is holding the thread to try to go in the middle to do what? To kill the master, the autist, the enemy, the beast. It's pretty tough to be autistic in Greece, basically, in so many ways. And especially when this is kind of how people care about you and advocate for you. Again, all you, for you, not with you. Have this kind of symbol. And the Saxonic help is many years ago doing much better. I mean, the Bible, thankfully, is not that dominant anymore, but it is again a reductionist way of the puzzle. Sometimes with the weeping wise boy, of course, wise boy, of course, crying, right? So what does that mean for someone's mental health? And then you read papers, evidence-based work, deficit, impairments, problem, like all this kind of super deficit kind of parenting. And very recently, unfortunately, I haven't had that with AI, but it colleagues are really well done. And always in the field. Then Freud, autism, Asperger's, autistic, all sorts of kind of keywords to see what comes up in 2 or 3 AI agents. A fantastic thing. They're really solid though. This is the kind of pictures we get. White, sad, male again. There's no autistic girls. There's no black, Asian, brown people. Very, very gloomy kind of pictures. So isn't the machines have picked up on that part as well? And then we do research. We do lots of research. Like many of you, I have found it difficult for research and relationships in neurodiversity. And we work with colleagues and we ask people to take photos, to draw, we do interviews and different other methodologies. And we ask them about their lives, we ask them about their sense of belonging, who they are, how they understand themselves. And they talk about wanting to have friends, wanting to have their favorite fluffy or whatever sensory comfort and toys. Lots of video games, as you might expect, in the younger ages. And also talk about being extremely lonely. They talk about being forgotten. They talk about not knowing how to be. They talk about, well, if you have been told so many times that nobody likes you, you start just not liking yourself. You just don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. Sometimes we find a way not to be here. This is a representation with clay of that student of how isolated she is. 15 years old, school is a nightmare, always on the side. But it doesn't have to be this way. And some of the reasons, one of the key reasons we're here today and in other places and we talk and work on that field is because it doesn't have to be this way. And how do you do it? How do you do it? Like all of us, sometimes I do it for myself anyway. You're just a drop in the ocean. And you want to break chains and you are curious and you feel the paradoxes in the field. This is when sometimes you get very likely to bring the right people together. I mean, I have been so lucky. I have been so lucky for people to give me space, to trust me, to listen, to work, to bring solutions. One of the key questions for me, if you like, it, that I started discussing with so many here in the room, and definitely the authors of the book, is how do we move from fixing to mutuality? Everything we know is about how do we change the autistic person, how do we fix the person? How do we work with the person? And then whose agenda? Which autistic people are becoming aware of who do you bring at the table? And what kind of participation are we talking about? We wanted to co-deliver and co-produce courses. And then we ended up having 2 or 3 young people only. And they happen to be males, they happen to be white. Or we have very older dominant voice. How do you bring everything together? There was lots of hope and lots of vision. And for those who weren't close, there was lots of chaos. There's always a bit of chaos. Things started shaping up because we brought so many experts by science and experience together to seriously co-delivery and co-production. And where do you stand in that as a non-autistic person? someone who is taking us through a narration, but you're also are under pressure and you are on the other side. And how do you manage these tensions? It all started about 2018 when we started reviewing our curriculum, started bringing many of the people you see in the photos here, but also many, many more people that haven't been in the photos. Some of you can see your faces, you look younger, many of you, years ago. Like key people, without these people, without our partners, without autism, without all the people that we have been working, a second voice, so many of you, most of you actually who are here, you have been part of the change. You have been part of the book as well. And what we were hoping that we can share in terms of a curriculum that is not dry, that is not looking at the clinical features of autism, and we're not teaching our students on how to give very normative assessments, neuronormative kind of CBT, and so on. So the book initially looks something like that. Pretty much. And I just don't know how Vanessa helped swap, the people, or Laura, does matter, or how Claire Evans was trusting me even back then. It was so dialogical, it was so alive. We just started coming together and thinking hard and disagree and getting it wrong and still getting it wrong, but sometimes you get it right, you get it wrong. And we kept on working and talking and understanding and hearing from my facts and experience and pulling out of views, trying to understand what does it mean for each one of us, from the different ways we work and the different intersections we carry, standing violence and all that stuff. Valencia, you've also been at the core of so much of the thinking. And here I hope I'm not going to get cheesy, but I have to say big thanks to these people here. Vanessa, I met Vanessa before I even come, and these people have really shaped the ideas and the way we work, even the way we do research. I met Vanessa even before I moved to London, randomly, on a conference. And I was like, what is she talking about? I'm like, I'm an autism expert. I think I know. What is she even talking about? And then 2015, I moved to London, and I started stalking her in mail. Online and in events. It was a research autism back then, I think. And I'm full of generosity, full of passion, full of knowledge that just shares and then brings and has the talent to bring nice people together. And then next thing I know, I'm on a train. I don't remember where we were going, Irina. Yeah. That's Irina. And we started working with the workforce, and we started realizing, okay, if we start teaching our students new things, but the supervisors had a degree from 10 years ago or 12 years ago, how do we catch up? There's a big, I wasn't doing the right thing. And I remember we were in trains talking about change, what does it mean? Being in meetings with supervisors and service managers, talking that autism is not exactly a disorder, almost whispering it in some meetings about what we were trying to do. And then Lucy putting up with me with everything pretty much, and then ending up to write book chapters together. And the young people from participation and the growth team and Monty back then. They blew our head. They just told us all the things they didn't like. They just said, this curriculum says nothing about me. It says nothing about what we're trying to do. Peter Fugel, always asking me difficult questions I don't understand. And always me making some sense from that, and always, pushing me to think further. And then Claire, from back then until now, just thank you and sorry for everything. It is a luxury and a privilege, and I do recognize that I finally have that privilege to be in spaces that promote curiosity, promote agency, allow you to think, allow you to bring people together, and it is a privilege, and that's the only way sometimes you can come up with something better or new. But most importantly, it's about coming together. One of the things we have discussed with so many of you is how difficult it is when you may be thinking differently, or you might have lots of questions, and you're dealing with that on your own. And I think one of the things that has connected us is that we came together. We it just felt so much nicer to be able to say, that doesn't work, but we are together, and we're thinking about it together, and we work it out together. And then that started growing more and more, and all these ideas, all these things I have learned from all of you, all these years before it became the book, because all of you, all the authors, have been already experts in their field, experts in what they're describing in the book, started growing more and more, started giving more ideas, more young people came on, neurodivergent young people came on board, and many of these ideas have been also part of what we're trying to achieve in lots of research we're doing at Autistic in UCL. We're also hearing from the voices of those who are not with us. We learn the stories from their parents, from the people who have loved them. And we're learning about what we need to change and what we need to do more. Some people most often critique this kind of neurodiversity affirming, neurodiversity informed practice as ideological, as political, as not scientific, I don't know, anyway. But there are so many ways and reasons when the paradigm shifts and why potentially a neurodiversity informed thinking can actually shift the way we work, but also the way we learn, the way we produce translational science, the way we're doing things. And, what if you have time, if you are in the mood, just read Tanuka Barks. We had lots of conversations around that with Edmund, and he has done a brilliant job talking about the different ways what shapes the paradigm about translational science and thinking, if you like. But in the utility, the last 30 years, translational science hasn't given us very good news about how to work with autistic people, with those with ADHD. For most studies, we have small statistical, non-significant effects, suggesting little clinical value, and some actually very good controlled trials with blinded outcomes. There is a sense that the old paradigm, the neurodisorder paradigm, is not driving clinical innovation. There is a cultural critique. I'm already giving you hints around that. How a narrative that humanizes autistic people, that limits who they are, that alienates them, that stigmatizes them and their families, and removes agency basically because someone else is the expert. What kind of questions are inspired from that kind of way of thinking? And I'll give an example just before I close, because we have wonderful people in the pilot I want to make sure that you hear from. So I'm really interested in depression the last few years, and we have a nice piece of work we're doing with Keith and Freud, UCL, Cardiff and Central colleagues, led by Sunuka Bark. So we're thinking of depression and how emotional regulation mediates depression. We should think about it, because we know depression has little consequences. We know autistic people are at much higher risk of suffering from depression. From a neurodisorder paradigm, if you're autistic, if you have ADHD, you have different all sorts of dysfunctions and difficulties and struggles, and that means that you can't really regulate very well your emotions, and you get into depression. But what happens if we flip the narrative and if we start reframing disorder, dysfunction, impairment as social constructs? If we start emphasizing on difference in a more balanced, in a different way? What happens when we start promoting and caring about dignity and self-advocacy and self-respect? When we seek for equity through accommodation and looking at environmental adjustments and changes rather than just within-person changes? And we are experience-driven. We learn from people's personal experiences. Then that model, and we have a few papers in press, can look differently. That if you have ADHD or you're autistic or both, you are more likely to have intense, longer, numerous lasting upsetting experiences. You will have so many triggers in your social and sensory world. You will have more challenging encounters. You will find many settings much more challenging for a person. which means that you will most probably suffer from chronic stress, low self-worth. You will ruminate. You will feel that it's again your fault. You will struggle to regulate your emotions, and negative emotions will take over, which leads to depression. Now, this hypothesis, it's many of us already in the room, we may agree, but we need to also have scientific evidence. One will tell me. And the good news is that we start having really good evidence. So we have done a very big study with 700 students, autistic, with or without ADHD, and a control group. And we have seen that when we compare, there is this kind of, am I suffering because of my neurology and my traits, and the more severity of my autism, of my traits, the more depression I will have? Or does it relate to the concept of emotional burden, something that young people have helped us through research to establish? And we have cross-sectional data, which means that we looked at one time in a big survey, and we measured and we did publicated statistics to understand, and we found out that diverse young people are experiencing twice as much in the school environment emotional burden and difficult situations. And we're also running it longitudinally. So we look at the last 2 years, these people and their trajectories. It might be interesting if people want to read it, but we also hear from people's stories. And it takes us back to what I said in the beginning about who we are and what kind of emotional burden we're talking about. So many of the young people spoke to us in interviews. We had 57 interviews, talk about social needs during interactions, as well as when they're excluded from interactions that they really wanted. They spoke about an ongoing experience of not being accepted, not belonging. In that piece, we also included people with ADHD. And while the key theme is, I'm out of it, I don't belong, I'm feeling alienated, there were some nuances, interesting nuances on how autistic people had a very deep sense of not belonging, not fitting in, whereas those with ADHD, they were very often feeling unsafe, that they are provoked and they're provoking others, and very often in relationships feeling victimized and unsafe. Then masking, interestingly, has been so strong. If you are neurodivergent, it's not surprising, and people mask. That, there is that kind of older theory that says that autistic people don't care, don't have theory of mind. And all autistic people in our sample spoke about how they're hiding in order to protect others, in order not to make others to worry about them, in order, basically from a deeply empathetic state to the point that they were almost shutting down and they were hiding so much. And then many people with ADHD had very similar views, but also they were so scared that they're going to pay consequences, that they're going to be punished. So they had not to say, not to be authentic in order to protect themselves almost from consequences. Some quotes and artwork from the young people, which again takes us back into why we need a neurodiversity-informed approach, a human approach, a collaborative approach that is giving agency to the young people to talk about what they see as the problem, what they see as solutions, and work with others. So again, if we go into the neurodiversity-informed paradigm, then we do recognize that people are into challenging settings, they have difficulty dealing with upset and stress, and the more it gets that difficult, the more then they struggle more and more to regulate. And we need to think of how we need to increase support encounters, adapt settings, train new approaches train them in new approaches for managing emotion, and importantly, help others around them to regulate their emotion, to support them to co-regulate. I don't know how I'm jumping from the previous one to this one. I don't know what I had in my head when I was doing this, but I think that I want to go back to, just before I close, to the point I made earlier, where is the love? I think for me, the biggest gift I got through working with many of you for this book is that I felt the love, I feel the love, we have been together. It hasn't been easy. I don't think it was ever meant to be easy. but it has been so rewarding. And it has been, this book has been a labor for people just spend their time over and over and reading out our corrections, working with us, speaking with us, tolerating us, because it has been a real labor of love. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Georgia, for that absolutely amazing and beautiful talk. That was wonderful. And I'm really excited to say that our next speakers are a panel of experts by experience and scientist practitioners sharing why this book is important and how it professionals and families can spoke to improve autistic experiences. So can I please call on our panelists to join us up? They will.
We have the joy and the privilege to have some of the book authors here with us, who are going to share some reflections, hopefully not what we would like to learn together. Talk more about, what inspires you for your chapter, or what changes, what were your aspirations, and what do you hope that Felicia's we're going to read that book. What kind of things that you're going for? So let's go in the order as you guys sit. It's really comfortable. What?
That'll play that.
In the power. Thanks for being part of this book. Over to you.
Of course. I really it's a way I've got to do bring it. So I would say, I think when I was asked to write the book, I didn't know what to say because I know I've done chapters. I didn't want to repeat as done with the previous ones. But I thought, my daughter is here. And I think for my journey was not being believed. And looking back when I first met Dr. George, I think she thought I was a bit crazy. He was saying I wanted to, my voice was always being gagged. I felt I was not being believed. I felt no one was listening to me. So I felt that everyone was always focused on my son. And I felt my daughter's voice needed to be hers. And I think when I wrote the chapter at the time, I felt that I wanted people to see a different perspective, because most of the time people always say, if you've got one autistic child, one maybe. But then when my youngest was diagnosed, people told me she wasn't autistic, she was copying her brother. So I had to be so careful that when I was writing the chapter, it's to look at things from my perspective. And as a black mother, how I was being told that at the time, all the time, is black people don't get autism. So I was very cautious. I always put word in the disclaimer is, this is my story, because another person may something totally different. But I know I had people did come back and say, thank you for opening up, because when I did the chapter, I can't remember what I actually wrote, because it's changed so much. But I can say, looking back at the time when I did write it, and I look at my daughter now, is how if I didn't get the understanding about what autism was from a parent's perspective, and working with a lot of professionals and working with people, working with a lot of researchers over the years, I don't think I'm going to be the person who I was, because I've got to understand the depths of, when I said to George the other day, Dr. Georgia, was, I think with parents, sometimes technical jargon can be very confusing. I'm very, what's the word with me? When I look at how I present myself, was just to say, when I'm speaking as a mother first, I'm speaking as a mother who wants to care for my child. I'm protecting her as like a mother, as a cub. And if somebody lied about me, I'm coming after you. And then when somebody saw me as a black mother in the black community, I was still not being heard, because they felt that I was accepting this label. What is this label? So I'm saying, I needed my child to be diagnosed, and her being a young girl being diagnosed. I understand a lot of other black autistic people, other black people who say, well, your daughter looks fine. But they don't understand the other side is, if your child is self-harming, if your child is having depression, if your child is suffering from anxiety, they can say, oh, but she's copying her brother. But her brother's in the residential school. So it shows sometimes as mothers we get gagged, they won't listen to us. And I think from the book, I'm just hoping that it's a voice to say, yes, I am a black mother, but there's a lot of white mothers have come and said, we're going through the same thing. But then if you are a black person or a black professional or somebody in the Asian community, not to hide who your child is, because you're going to cause more trauma. And I think that's what happened to my daughter, was being in a black school, and they say it was a black school who just didn't understand what autism was. When she was self-harming, she doesn't do no more, because she had the right support. And I did go and speak to Nexus, so I used to speak to a lot of autistic people, and they're the ones that were my strengths. I did have that connection. I think I would have been under Section 47, my children put into care. So I'm thinking the book would open those doors to people. And if you are working with black families, who do you go to? Because if you don't have that door open, you're going to see that every black person that comes to you is erratic, exaggerating. And if you are a black professional, if you don't understand what autism is, there is a book that's going to open that door, because not everybody wants to speak. And I was at 1%.
Thank you so much. And you have written this chapter with Professor Prithvi Peralta, who couldn't make it today. But it's, the beauty of it is, again, how through that collaboration we can hear from a researcher perspective, but also from a lived experience, our multiple perspectives. Thank you. Dr. Mary Evans, over to you.
Thank you. I shape, but I'm going to put this here, and hopefully you will hear me if I just talk loud about it. So, how do I find that? Sorry. I mean, I was really privileged to be able to write a chapter. It was a bit like being an able to have my voice as well. For me, I'm a systemic psychotherapist. I've worked in CANS for many years. I'm also a neurodiversity lead within a foundation trust in the NHS. For me, the chapter that I wrote was trying to move away from a them and us chapter. I felt like a lot of the talking about autistic people or neurodivergent people within healthcare services was very much like, they are the autistic people, we provide services for them, and then we're separate to that and we're different to that. When what I really wanted to do was invite people to think about, actually it's an us and us. We have neurodivergent people who work within services, who are a resource to those who may be neurotypical, don't understand autism or neurodiversity in the same way. We have neurodivergent people who have children who are accessing the services that they might also be working in as well. And I also wanted to invite therapists who, I've quite often hear this narrative about, oh, I can't work with them, they're autistic. It was almost like the autistic diagnosis was suddenly meant that that person couldn't access the service. It made them kind of untouchable therapeutically, or something that was another person's job to do. With this kind of myth of the autism specialist, that, you know, other people have this specialism, they should work with autistic people, and then I won't work with autistic people. When actually autistic people are overrepresented in mental health services, but they also need to access everyday services like podiatry or dentistry and everything else. So I wanted to write a chapter that really said that it's everybody's business. Everybody needs to know about autism. Everybody needs to be able to adapt what they do in a way that's accessible for autistic people and their families. And also to acknowledge that we work amongst autistic people as therapists and practitioners. We don't just work with them, we are them. And that was kind of what I wanted to bring into my chapter. And I was really grateful to be able to have that voice as well. Thank you very much for allowing me to do that.
Mary has lots of content in her center, but I really like the technique that she's offering us to think in terms of the Thrive approach, to see Thrive approach from a less neuronormative perspective, and to try and just stretch to think the model differently. Thank you so much. Deacon Doyens is next, and Deacon has been a companion in so many different ways and in so many different projects, including a content developer and facilitator from time to time at the National Autism Training Program, as Anna Freud is running in has run in partnership with Autism. Deacon has been part of an important chapter. Over to you, Deacon.
Thank you. So to start with, I'm lived experience. I'm autistic, dyslexic, and neurodivergent in general. And to me, I think the 3 words on the front cover summarize the importance of this book and what I feel most hopeful for. These are promoting self-agency, curiosity, and collaboration. Over the last few years, reflecting on my own experience with therapy, the fact I'm autistic after being diagnosed 5 years ago, and having discussions with a neurodivergent community, I feel these are the ideas that keep coming up to what makes therapy, in a simplest way, work for autistic individuals. So these elements were always considered and questioned, and all we meet these within therapy and decisions around therapy, I feel would have a massive impact. I think the idea of curiosity really stood out throughout the book. Each autistic person is an individual, and no individual is the same. As well as autistic needs can be so diverse. I know, for example, how I find the lights in the room could be very different tomorrow from today. So I think always willing to learn and listen, professionally and personally. But it's not just a therapist who may have a lot of curiosity. I know as a client, when I attended therapy, I had a lot of curiosity. I was interested in learning the psychology and science behind things, such as trauma, as I love learning. In hindsight, learning is one of my special interests. I think where this book is needed is before autistic individuals haven't been asked commonly about their experiences, especially in such an open way, and given the opportunity to not only share their experiences, but collaborate on something that brings both the experience, but also the practical together. This book gives an insight into the neurodivergent experience in relation to mental health, and lets them be part of a collaborative conversation with therapy. It's also needed as therapy can be a positive space with incredible impacts. I know from my own experience the changes it created, but also even though I wasn't diagnosed, it was hugely helpful my therapist accommodating me in that space. It shows that autistic individuals can reflect on their experiences and have a voice. They can contribute and collaborate on pieces of work, and I hope there will be an increasing opportunities for autistic individuals to collaborate. I think something that really speaks to me in this book is just how much it is needed, and I like how it challenges in a very honest, clear way some of the things but as things have been done and how things have been viewed, for example the deficit set model, and instead look at the positives and the strength a young person has. The deficit model can be so harmful, and from my personal experience, I really hope this is a view we completely move away from. The other elements that stood out to me is the idea that therapy has been one size fits all, or not seen as a person as a whole, instead just the reasons behind therapy, ignoring the context. This felt important, as I know from my own experiences how much my therapist made sure to understand me as a whole, as men could find the best ways to engage in our sessions, but also support, for example, how I might be able to regulate my emotions better. Another was from chapter 50, about the world can be unsafe, so a therapy room and individuals within need to be safe. Just feels such an important consideration, especially in relation to neurodiversity, as the world can be very overwhelming with a lot of expectations that can be difficult to meet, for example, small talk. Final elements that stood out to me was the fact it's an honest liaison story. It's not easy opening up, especially about traumatic stories, and in a lot of cases we don't have to, at least to you. If an individual has it, it shows a level of trust and comfortability with you, and that's a big thing. I hope people who read this book don't just focus on what is being said and that may mean to them. However, they also feel comfortable if to do so. This book is written with emotion and a purpose, and I feel that comes across. I hope overall it improves the practice and experience for all involved. This goes back to the idea of therapy needs to be collaborative, and hopefully will come with better outcomes and be more comfortable. For the client, a place that helped, I was a safe space. I think in relation to chapter 15 especially, we move from just understanding or acceptance of these contexts, but to active engagement. For examples of how you may do this. What's one small thing you may get a change in your practice or interactions, as it can be the smallest things that make the biggest difference. For example, that may be asking about a certain interest they always like talking about, and open space for further discussion, and still like this book is part of the beginning of spaces becoming more neurodivergent and further. I think all the things I've spoken about are transferable to families, and the way families can create a safe space for a young person and support them to navigate the world, as well as providing them a resource to understand how therapy can be neurodivergent, the change that's happening, and hearing neurodivergent voices. Finally, there's just so much about seeing and understanding people's uniqueness. It comes up so often in the book, either directly or indirectly, but I always feel if people were more accepting and acting on this fact, the world would be a lot more affirming and easier for autistic individuals.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Next is Zoe. Zoe hasn't contributed to the group, but it's really important to hear from her as someone who has been working with passion in the field. So introduce yourself. Tell us.
Hi. Not just having addressed the match point comment, but it's I am a late diagnosed ADHD, and actually, since I think the previous book for now late diagnosed autistic individual, with a child who is autistic and ADHD, who I hope embodies the future. At her diagnosis, she punched the air and did a happy dance and proceeded to tell the clinician that difference is absolutely okay, and it's really important that we know our brain types so that we can go out and thrive. She also explained how she was part of a multi-schools council, so she could tell other people how important difference is and how it is okay, and how the bullies can go away, and she will let them know that. So, sorry, proud body moment, but this book I came across just as I was starting a new job, a new service in Essex, supporting autistic people. They're supporting autistic people by supporting the services around autistic people to understand, to adapt, because we're different, we're not wrong. So this book was a wonderful standard operating procedure if necessary. Yeah, this gave me that clear direction. This is what we need to do. And we're not going to get it right every day, but it's a start, it's a direction. It's a direction of change that we can take to practitioners throughout schools, through camps, through social care, to say that we are different, not wrong. We don't need to have mental health battles or struggles. So please hear us when we communicate our distress quietly, because if we don't, we end up communicating our distress loudly. That distress gets mislabeled, mistreated, and others will speak far more eloquently about that. It's for the next generation. There is hope that they don't need to experience the life that we have, that they can thrive, they can be anything. And the other thing that Tegan just reminded me about was the safe spaces. If we as professionals with lived experience cannot stand up in our departments, in our services and say, I am autistic, I am ADHD, how are we a safe space for the young people that come to us in distress who are autistic and ADHD? And one of the most powerful moments I've seen recently is where a psychiatrist, the professional in a CPA, has stood up and said, this is me. And that is why we're doing this, because we are shining an autism lens on this, and we will do it differently. So the message is getting out there. The message gets out there when I talk to my clients, many of them adults as well. I work across all ages, and this doesn't just apply to children. And I tell them they're okay. I tell them that they're wonderful and amazing and unique, and they don't have to fit the world. They can be their authentic selves. And it won't happen overnight, but I'll be here beside them whilst they do it. They tend to cry. But to many, it's the first time they've been heard, they've been seen, and they've been told it's okay to be you. And that's what we've got to do. And that's when a book is so important, because it's putting that out there. It's making it real. You know, it's not rocket science, but this is making it real. This is something we can hand to other clinicians and say, look, I've only got 5 minutes, but read this. And it is making a difference, because they are reading it, they are ordering it.
Thank you so much. Next is Kira. Kieran had so much to say that we had to good job there.
There's a sense of irony in you saying that, because I foolishly decided not to prepare anything tonight because I wanted to do what other people had to say and then riff off of that. But I've been training at the Anna Freud for 2 days now, and have no words left. So apologies if my words do not work this evening. And there's another irony in there, in that the most difficult chapter that I had to write was about burnout, and Laura put up with me immensely around that. So now I am burnt out and talking to you about burnout. I not only probably had the longest chapter in the book, I also had the privilege of writing 2 chapters in the book, which was just, I don't know why I was lucky enough to be picked for that. If lucky is the right word. But, oh God, there's so many messages come through this evening already, and also I know what's going to be following as well, and I don't want to hold up time for things that are more important. But what this book does for me is, we talk about paradigm shifts a lot. We talk about moving from one place to another, But for people who are outside of those paradigms, for people who don't live these paradigms, it's very difficult for them to be able to have a platform from which to make that shift, to facilitate their education, to something to spring from, something to move from. And I really think that's what this book does. It provides a foundation for people to sit, to reflect, to contemplate, and to plan how to move forward. There is a structure there, which I think others have spoken beautifully about tonight. So the messages that come through that book, it's not about lived experience, it's about humanity, and it's about how do we create safety for people? How do we curate safety for people? This book is a manuscript that enables that. I really believe that. So it is only a springboard. There is so much more work to be done, but without a springboard like this, people are just rubbing around in the dark, trying to scramble to find ways of doing things, latching onto things that might work or might not work, and experimenting. This platform is something that enables them to do this in a very, very different way. So uniquely for me, I'm going to shut up now and let somebody else speak.
Crystal hasn't written a chapter that the book is dedicated to his son and Emma's son, who was from Winchester.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. So my name is Tristan, autistic. I've been a trainer, core trainer on the National Autistic Training Programme for nearly 2 years now. 2 children, as you've heard. Stefan, the beautiful boy that you saw in the slides, doesn't live with us anymore. He lives in Devon. He was 50 when he passed, and Emma's going to talk some more about Stefan. I spent 32 years as an autistic guide in the police service, which was a tough gig, let me tell you. I used to sit there and hear how they spoke about autistic people, neurodivergent people, and it wasn't safe for me to disclose as that roughy tufty copper. And so I didn't until my last few years, when I'd climbed the ranks, when I'd secured my environment in an office of my own, and felt secure enough to actually come out, because that's how it felt. But, just thinking wider than that inequality, inequalities in accessing diagnosis, support services, mental health services, inequality around harm, suicide, inequality around jobs and employment, and education and SEND, and social care and the criminal justice system, life expectancy, and of course PIP at the moment, very topical. Neurodivergent people have that stuck up against them across poor transitions in life. And, we hear resources, finance, staff, which is real when we get that. Continuity of staff. But sometimes there's a cultural issue, the willingness has got to be there to change if we know we can do better. And I suppose that's key for us. It was key for Stefan. He was denied support, neurotypical risk assessments were carried out with Stefan, and we were told he wasn't a risk, and 2 weeks later, he died. So it clearly was a risk. I'll just try to read out a few words that I picked out of the book neurodivergent people share with me. Doubt, belonging, blame, unloved, unlovable, shame, confusion, uncertainty, trust, isolation, safety, fear, no hope, and brokenness. And Stefan used to use some of those words to us. He couldn't see a way forward, because if we lose belonging, as John Adams says, what is there to stick around? But as Georgia says, it doesn't have to be that way.
So that's definitely what needs changing, isn't it? I was want any other parent to experience this, or any other child to feel that broken. from a professional perspective, I've been a teacher for over 30 years. I'm a playing art therapist. And I use this book when I'm also a clinical supervisor for other therapists. So play and being creative lends itself really well. So then you're a divergent community, being curious, being interested, using other means of communicating through art and play. And I have been plugging this book with no one's business. Every bit of training I'm doing to professionals and play therapists, I use this book. And also trust in it. And I have set up in our area in Kent a organisation called Stack Lives, Stand and Back for Kindness, because we want this to be second legacy that we carry forward on what we've learned or what we understand, so that other parents are accepting and understanding their children who they are, professionals are getting them right, focus and being curious. But as we know, this is an amazing book. You've got a long way to go with that. So I just want to say thank you so much to George as well for the dedication to Stefan. We promised him, he died 3 years ago yesterday. When he was in hospital, we promised him he would never be forgotten. So what a way, will never be forgotten. So thank you. So relax. This is from the project.
I think you got the order wrong, buddy. I mean, it's the ultimate failure. So service, isn't it? When something like that happens to anybody, not least somebody so young. I spent a lot of time growing up with similar feelings to Stefan, and I spend a lot of my time now thinking about restraint, which you might think, oh, that's not what we're doing there, but I think actually it is. And Vanessa, I've spent a lot of time thinking about cultural restraint and what that means actually for our communities and our various intersections, but actually the neurodivergent people, and the way that there exists a narrative that it's only okay to exist in a normalized kind of way, and if you fall out with that, we're going to restrain you, and we're going to restrain you by constricting your agency, your ability to be who you are, your ability to act and express yourself in different ways, and there is a pressure to conform, isn't there? There's a pressure to conform for all of us, but for some of us that pressure is magnified by our various intersections, and we can't freely express our thoughts, and we might be able to keep those at bay. But it's much harder, isn't it, when those build up and they become a pressure cooker, and those emotions actually need to come out somehow, right, in some way. We've had lots of different ways that's happened for various people on the panel. Sometimes when I talk to teachers, when I talk to therapists, when I talk to mental health professionals, they can't see what I'm talking about. They can't see it. And I think because it's so ingrained, isn't it? It's so ingrained that unless a book like the one that Georgia and the team and other people have curated, to borrow Kieran's words, these microaggressions, they accrue, don't they? And they chip, and they erode at our sense of self until actually there's almost nothing left. And so I was writing about restraint, and I was writing about agency, and actually how we can expand people's agency. And it really comes down to accepting the entirety of the person, all of them, especially, most importantly, when they're doing shit we don't like, right? When things are super hard, when they're super bad, when people are super distressed, that's when we have to love them the most. That's when we have to accept them the most. Because then what we're communicating is that unconditionality. That it doesn't matter how mad you are, how bad you are, how monstrous you are, all of these ugly, horrible, horrific words, that behind those closed doors that aren't maybe written in reports, but they're written in different ways, some professionals are saying, some people are using these words, then people don't feel that love, and they don't feel that connection, and they don't feel that belonging. And my chapter was about that, but as others have said, it threads all the way throughout the book. And it's an instruction manual in some ways, but actually it's promoting a way of being. It's promoting a way of being with a person so that we can show these things to them. So I'm really grateful to Georgia for inviting me to be a part of that, and to be a part of something so great actually, which is re-narrating, and it has re-narrated the way that we should be actually, that the human that we should be with people, so that people's rights to self-determination and their right to dignity and their right to be felt as part of the human race, which of course they are, can be realised. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We have over base you and the question. Great.
Please, Laura, to
Coming on the captions.
thank you so much.
We're great. A few questions. Yes.